So I believe we are live and we're all connected up. So great warm welcome to everyone once again from all over the planet, it would appear. There's so many of you. How wonderful to see the interest and enthusiasm for people to join in and listen to this APMEN course on vector surveillance presented um, by the inimitable Professor Neil Lobo with his wealth of knowledge and experience. So it's day two of our vector surveillance course. Let me remind everyone that the session is being recorded. It will be available to you. Wulan or Dr. Porn will post the URL in the chat box so you can access it at any time and download it and share with friends if you want to, or revise if you feel a need to. Today, we have a little more extra time, so we're going to have a 1 hour lecture session and followed by a 10-minute refreshment break, followed by a 1 hour lecture session. And then we move on to the question and answer section. And again, we'll try and harvest a good number of questions for Neil to respond to. May I ask everyone, please feel free, and we encourage you, pose your questions, but please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. There's too much going on, and we can't monitor the Q&A and chat box. So many chats coming up. So we focus on monitoring the Q&A box for questions. So please, we encourage you to ask questions, but put them in the Q&A box. Thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Neil. Please, Neil. Thank you.
Hey everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Yesterday I did this from Bangkok, and today I am up in northern uh, Thailand. As all entomologists are everywhere all the time, I think tomorrow I'm in another place in Thailand. So, doing my job just as I think all of you all are as well. As a note, yesterday we discussed downloading the ESPT, the Entomological Surveillance Planning Tool. And Wulan, would you mind putting that link uh, in the chat, please? I think you copied the link to put in the chat so everyone could download that. All the tables and figures that I have referenced during the presentations are available on that link. So now I will start sharing my screen and start my next presentation. Please be patient with me while I figure this out as usual. And presentation mode. Yep. Does that look good?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Neil. Excellent.
Let me move that. Yeah. So yesterday we went over sort of a logical flow of how to design entomological surveillance, as well as important concepts to factor in when you're doing this. The first thing was, what is your question? We have to direct all our entomological surveillance, and what we do needs to be directed by a question, as well as what programmatic decision that question will answer or help make. After deciding on the question, you select your indicators. Those are your data points that will answer your question. The next step, which is this presentation, is on the sampling methods that will collect the indicators that will answer your question. So here we go. What is your question is the first step. Then what are the minimal essential indicators? And today, right now, we'll go over sampling methods. So we'll go over what are the basic advantages and limitations of each sampling method, or at least the main sampling methods available to us, as well as understand how to select appropriate and available sampling methods to address the priority question. And you can use the ESPT for this, of course. So we're right there right now in the ESPT workflow through. So now if you look at page 18 on the ESPT, and you can do this later, you don't have to do this now. You can see all the sampling methods listed out. And what we'll go through is how do we select sampling methods based on your question and the indicators we have selected, right? It is important to note that every sampling method takes advantage of a specific mosquito behavior. Just like interventions take advantage of specific mosquito behaviors, sampling methods do the exact same thing. If the mosquito has that behavior that the sampling method takes advantage of, we can actually capture that mosquito. And if it doesn't, we cannot capture that mosquito. Just as a simple example, if we have a mosquito that loves biting cows, right? And prefers biting cows, if we use a human as bait, we're not going to get as many mosquitoes, right? We're probably going to get very few. In addition to that, some mosquitoes just can't be sampled well with traps. For example, Anopheles dirus is not sampled or is not trapped very well with the CDC light trap. It is trapped better with human landing catches. Each method, each sampling method, just like an intervention, has its own positive and negative points. And understanding these positive and negative points is really important when you look at your data, right? Because, for example, if you use a CDC light trap and you catch a lot of maculatus and you don't catch dirus and you think there's dirus at your site, and you realize that the CDC light trap doesn't catch dirus that well, then you can understand your data better, right? Box one in the ESPT goes over the main sampling methods, and I will go over each one of these. And if you look at Annex 3 in the ESPT, it goes over a bunch more information on each of these sampling methods. So if you've never used these sampling methods before, you can just reference these tables and see what a whole bunch of people across the world have, a whole bunch of people have put together, helped us put together these tables. And so it's knowledge from a lot of places and basically data on a lot of these traps that you can look through. So the first sampling method, this is considered the gold standard as an important sampling method, but of course, it is based on what your question is, right? It is the human landing catch. And as you can see, it looks at the mosquito behavior this trap takes advantage of, the mosquito behavior this sampling method takes advantage of, is blood seeking, human feeding mosquitoes. We use a human as a bait. And here is Brandy, who is, well, we used to work together when she was a graduate student, and she is a researcher right now. But here she is in Indonesia using the human landing catch to sample mosquitoes. And here we use humans as bait. You can see she has an aspirator, and she is using this aspirator to suck up mosquitoes that land on her leg. You can see the cups in which you can place these mosquitoes in. So you can collect mosquitoes for an hour and place all those mosquitoes in that cup. And so every hour we can see the species and number of mosquitoes that land on a human being. This is important because it directly captures the host seeking rate, the human host seeking rate. You can place a person indoors and catch have indoor human landing catches, or you can place a person outdoors and have outdoor human landing catches. As you can see, Brandy is sitting outside sampling mosquitoes. You can even place a person in the forest and do forest human landing catches. So wherever you want to see what the human landing rate is, you can use a human landing catch. If you remember from yesterday, we looked at human behavior observations. So the human behavior observations are paired. Ideally, the human behavior observations would be paired with human landing catches to understand community-based exposure, if you remember what we went through yesterday. Each of these sampling methods can answer different questions. And if you think about it, this is an easy question. An easy question that this sampling method would understand is what are the mosquito species that like to feed on humans at my site? Or what is the indoor human landing rate? Or what is the outdoor human landing rate? If we pair the human landing catch with human behavior observations, we can look at community exposure. So the question would be, where and when is the community being exposed to mosquito bites even when they have interventions in their houses? The next sampling method is the human baited trap. So the human landing catch has several issues with it, right? And there are several ethical boards as well as countries that do not allow the human landing catch. And this is because the person over here, Brandy, or me, or anyone else who is conducting a human landing catch can potentially be exposed to an infectious mosquito bite. So they might contract malaria. You can reduce this risk by giving them prophylaxis or giving them having access to good care so that they don't suffer from any malaria they get while doing this, if it happens. Uh, so they are better protected. However, there are other diseases like viral diseases and arboviral diseases that might be transmitted by Anopheles as well as other mosquitoes that we do not have prophylaxis for. And this is one of the main ethical issues where people have problems with this sampling method. However, many countries do allow it. And at least in my experience, I've conducted human landing catches many, many, many times, and I have never gotten malaria with good care and good trapping methodologies. Of course, this depends. It will be allowed depending on the country and your ethical board. To prevent this exposure to mosquito bites, a possible mosquito bite, there is a human baited trap. Here we use a human to bait the mosquitoes, where the mosquitoes are attracted to the human. However, the person is protected inside another tent. So here we look at human blood-seeking and human-feeding mosquitoes. And you can see this person in the Solomon Islands is inside a tent and protected from mosquito bites. And this smaller tent is placed in a larger tent, and the larger tent is left open. So you can imagine a mosquito can smell the human being, sense its heat, come inside the tent, try to feed on this person, but cannot reach that person. So then they will land on the inside of this bigger tent and wait there. And we can go in every hour and collect all the mosquitoes that have entered that tent. And therefore, we can look at the human landing rate, a proxy for the human landing rate every hour. The questions we would ask are similar to that of the human landing catch. Similar to the human baited trap, we can have animal baited traps. And over here, you can see at the same site, we were trying to figure out which mosquito species, if they preferred biting humans, or if they preferred biting the main domestic animal there, which were pigs. So we had the pig inside a little enclosure and the larger tent there. We could not put the pig inside a smaller tent because the pig just did not like it. But the guy liked it because he liked to sleep there protected. So over here, the mosquitoes would come in, be attracted to the pig, and land on the inside of the tent, either before or after their feed. So you can see how a human baited trap or an animal baited trap might capture different species and different densities of each species and can answer different questions. By the way, in this study, which I'll be talking about, no, I won't be talking about it. But in this study, we found that the mosquito species in this site, Anopheles farauti, definitely preferred biting human beings. Here's another example of a human baited trap. And thank you, Leo, for some of these pictures here. You can see there's the person that will sit on this chair inside a protected enclosure, and mosquitoes can fly in here, try and access that person, but they cannot. And then we can collect them from the inside of this outer bed net enclosure. Here's another example of a cow-baited trap where we have a cow inside an enclosure, and this outer screening will capture the mosquitoes that come in to feed on the cow. It's important to note that this is slightly above the ground so that the mosquitoes, the anopheles, can fly into this enclosure to feed on the cow. Here's another example of a cow-baited trap from Myanmar. I'm pretty sure the guy should not be there while we're conducting the collections, but in this picture, he is tying the cow down there so the cow doesn't get up and run away. The third type of trap is an indoor resting collection. In this sampling method, we look at mosquitoes that are resting on the inside of enclosures. This can be cowsheds, though it is usually structures and houses. We look at mosquitoes that have come in to feed and rest on the walls, or they come in, feed, and rest on the walls, or they have already fed and come in and rest on the walls inside these structures. This is an important sampling method when we are trying to understand indoor residual spraying, or IRS. IRS functions on mosquitoes that sit or rest on these indoor sprayed surfaces because they would kill them if they were susceptible. There are multiple types of indoor resting collections. One of them is the pyrethroid spray catch, or PSCs, and that's depicted in this picture below. In this sampling method, we would go into the house early in the morning. And the assumption is that mosquitoes fly in at night to feed, and they have fed or they didn't quite get a blood feed, but they're resting on the walls inside that house in the morning. And we'd go in there, shut all the windows, shut all the doors, cover all the surfaces with a white sheet, and you can see the white sheet over there. And then we'd spray pyrethroid inside the house and then shut the doors and windows, keep them all shut and leave the house for about 10 minutes. And all the mosquitoes that are in that house will fall down to the ground because of the insecticide. Then we will collect those sheets and take them out. And you can see this man looking through this pile of insects there for the anopheles. And that would represent the number of mosquitoes that are resting in that house at that time in the morning. So obviously, some mosquitoes would have come in and fed and left before that. But this test looks at all the mosquitoes, the sampling method looks at all the mosquitoes that are present in the morning when we go do that, do this sampling. We normally do this at about 6, 7 in the morning as early as possible. It is definitely an inconvenience to the people who live there. Another method, another indoor resting collection is the Procopac backpack aspirators. And this is basically a vacuum cleaner, a vacuum sort of machine that you have on your back, and a little device over here where you can just hold and suck up all the mosquitoes. And here it is with an extension so you can go up high walls, like high up on the wall or near the roof. You can do this every hour. So you can look at every hour the number of mosquitoes that have come in and are resting on the walls. Usually we get more mosquitoes with the Procopac than with the pyrethroid spray collections with the PSCs, because with the PSCs, we miss all the mosquitoes that come in, rest or feed, and then leave before the morning. The Procopac does make a lot of noise, so people who live in the houses usually don't like it. The third one is the Indo aspiration, and it's similar to the Procopac backpack aspiration, except instead of a vacuum, we use our mouths. And we use the aspirators and we suck up the mosquitoes that are resting on the inside of the walls. We can do this every hour, of course, and it's much more silent and much more effective, though we might miss some that are really high up because we cannot reach. So here is an example picture of Procopac collections that are happening with a much larger Procopac machine. Thank you, Leo, for these pictures as well. Here's a pyrethrum spray catch picture. You can see we have covered the inside structures, the beds, the chairs, everything with these white sheets. And over here, he's looking for mosquitoes that might have fallen on the white sheets after spraying insecticide in the room. The fourth type of trap is one we use quite a lot, and that is the CDC light trap. This samples mosquitoes that are attracted to light, and we can use this trap with multiple sources of bait, multiple types of bait to attract the mosquito to them. Usually it is a human bait, so we will place this trap by a sleeping human being by their feet. We can use CO2, carbon dioxide, as a bait. We can use UV light or even place it by animals. And of course, what you use as a bait will tell you the species that you sample, as well as the densities of each species that you sample. So if you use the same trap in different locations, you will get different mosquitoes. If you use the same trap with different baits, you will capture different mosquitoes. The CDC light trap is often used as a proxy for human landing catches, as in this is the landing rate because the human landing catch is not allowed or not permitted. So we use the CDC light trap instead. It is important to realize that the CDC light trap does not capture the same species or the same numbers of each species, and it captures less mosquitoes outdoors than indoors. Though if you have standardized CDC light trap collections, your data is usually pretty good. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention how the CDC light trap works. So what happens is here you have a basically this top sheet helps to prevent rain landing on the trap. You have a batteries, you can see here, and the battery starts a little fan that turns around over here, and the fan blows air down into this cloth cage. So your mosquito comes along and sees the light there. The light is on because of the batteries. And this is placed by, let's say, someone's feet. So the mosquito is attracted to the smell of the human being and it sees the light. It goes up towards the light. And the vacuum produced by the fan sucks the mosquito down here and into this sort of cloth cage. And now you can go in and collect the mosquitoes every 12 hours, like set the trap up at 6 p.m. and pick it up in the morning and you'll have 12 hours worth of mosquitoes, or you can collect this every hour. You do have CDC light traps that have a 12-hour thing where there's like 12 compartments, and every hour the compartment moves so it can sample the mosquitoes for that hour. Those are a lot more expensive, and though they work, they break a lot too. So that's CDC light traps. The fifth and sixth type of traps are very similar, and they are human odor-baited traps or animal odor-baited traps. And here we use the smell of a human or an animal to capture these mosquitoes. This is the human decoy trap, and this was developed by Francis Hawkes, who is sitting down there. And this uses the three cues that mosquitoes are attracted to when they are looking for a host. So mosquitoes are attracted to darker objects, and you can see this dark drum here. They are attracted to warm objects, as in like mammals are warm, right? So this dark drum is filled with warm water. So it's dark and warm. And inside this tent there, that blue tent, is a person sleeping. And there's a fan at the end of this tube that blows the air from that tent out here and it exits here. And so right out here, you have something big, it's dark, and you have smells out here from a host. And this plastic sheeting here is sticky plastic. So anything that lands on it will actually get stuck there. So you can imagine a person sleeping here throughout the night, breathing out carbon dioxide, producing smells. The smells are produced out here because of the fan, and a mosquito comes and lands on here and gets stuck to this sticky trap because it's warm and large. So here, this is also a proxy for human landing catches, and at some sites, it has been demonstrated to work much better than a human landing catch. It captures far more mosquitoes, and some sites it doesn't. It completely depends on your site. Here's an example of an odor-baited trap. And in this bigger tent here, we have a cow. You can't see the cow, but it's in there. And there's a fan blowing all the air into this trap here. And so the mosquitoes would come out here, enter here because of the smells, because of the odor, and gets trapped in here. This is also kind of hard to implement. I remember this was in Mali, and it was so difficult to get that cow to come in here. It was quite ridiculous. It kept trying to escape because if I was that cow, I would not want to be in a tent. We have outdoor resting collections. So just like PSCs and indoor aspirations and what else? Indoor aspirins and Procopac aspirations capture indoor resting mosquitoes. Outdoor resting collections, there are several types of outdoor resting collections. capture mosquitoes resting outdoors. Now, there are a couple of types of outdoor resting traps. There's a pit trap where we dig a pit, and inside the pit, we'll dig a hole that goes laterally, horizontally. And some species of mosquitoes tend to rest in there at night. And we can come here in the morning and capture those mosquitoes. We also have pot traps. So these are pots that are dark, and there's usually water placed in there, and just a little water to keep it humid, and mosquitoes will blood feed and try and rest in there. These sampling methods, though at some sites they might be effective, in my experience, they've never caught enough mosquitoes to do a really great study or never been representative. So that's just my experience. And maybe at your site, your mosquitoes might work really well with these sampling methods. So this is a carbon dioxide baited trap, and these are traps where the main attractant is carbon dioxide. And of course, this can be utilized with multiple different traps. For example, with the host decoy trap that I showed you earlier, inside this tent, you can have just carbon dioxide coming out. And so at the end, you have heat from this big black drum, and you have carbon dioxide as well. You can use carbon dioxide alongside the CDC light trap to attract the mosquitoes there. And in this trap, it looks familiar. It looks like the human or animal baited trap. You can just have a box with dry ice that produces carbon dioxide, and the mosquitoes will be attracted to that, thinking there's an animal host in there, and come and fly in and fly up here and get sampled in there. They would get trapped in there, and we can collect them every hour. Here's an example of a tent trap with dry ice placed near a river. And of course, we have gravid traps. Gravid traps are sample mosquitoes that are looking to lay eggs, to oviposit. There are multiple different types. These are more effective for Aedes than for Anopheles in my experience, but maybe at your site, you can possibly find mosquitoes that are really sampled well with this trap. In my experience, Anopheles are not caught as well. We also have the window exit trap, and this is kind of interesting. The window exit trap looks at mosquitoes that enter the house to blood feed or enter a house for any reason and then leave before the morning. So they've blood fed and they're like, I want to go back to the forest, or I want to go hang out in some bushes. So they leave, and they usually leave through windows. So you can see on the left here, we have the wall of a hut, and there's a window that's covered in black cloth. And we have these sampling measures, this window exit trap, where the mosquito would fly out over here and then get trapped in this space out here. And that's called a window exit trap. So we can place this window exit trap on the outside of a house, and all the mosquitoes that enter, and mosquitoes usually enter through the eaves of the house, through the top, between the roof and the wall that goes up to the roof. Mosquitoes usually enter through that space, and they leave through the windows. So you can actually capture the mosquitoes that enter and then leave by the morning. On the right is a gigantic, I have no idea why they made such a big window exit trap, which you can kind of see it might be a window exit trap made to capture a human being because it's so giant. But you can see the mosquitoes would exit through this window and get trapped in this very big box. Maybe the person making the trap was trying to catch someone. What's cool is that if you have a window exit trap, you can pair the window exit trap with a PSC, a pyrethroid spray catch. Let me scroll back quickly with this trap, this sampling method in the morning. So in the morning, you can look at all the mosquitoes that are still in the house, right, that remain in the house at that time. And with the window exit trap, you can look at all the mosquitoes that entered in the evening and at night and tried to leave. So you can get an overall count of mosquitoes that entered the house to blood feed, and the ones that are still remaining there, and the ones that had left. You can pair them pretty well and get good data. And of course, we have larval surveys, and here is when we want to collect the larvae of mosquitoes. There are multiple reasons why we would want to do this. The primary reason we usually do this is to collect larvae for insecticide resistance tests, correct? So we could collect larvae. We'd want to know, obviously, the species of the larvae. Every time we mention mosquitoes in analysis, we want to know the species of it. We can collect larvae to understand which sites are more productive for larviciding and for larval source management. There are many reasons why to collect larvae. And here's an example. I think I showed this to you all before, where we have multiple larval sites at a site in Halmahera in Indonesia, and each one of these had either had or did not have larvae in them. And of course, there's a cone or funnel net for wells. And over here, this sampling method enables us to capture mosquitoes at rest in wells. Thank you, Leo, for this sampling, for these pictures. I've actually never used this sampling method. And you can actually see Leo on the top right using this method. Yep. Thank you. Yeah. So whenever you're selecting these mosquito sampling methods to collect the indicators to answer your question, it is really important to factor in what is your question. Does the sampling method you're using actually collect the data that answers your question? Many times I see people just say, let's use the CDC light trap, but it doesn't necessarily answer your question, right? Or we can't use an HLC, let's use a cow-baited trap. But your cow-baited trap might not answer your question if your question is related to human exposure, right? The mosquitoes feeding on a cow might not feed on the human. The next part is, what is the mosquito behavior there's available trap take advantage of? The mosquito behavior is really important. And what we've realized is that the same species at different sites act different. And of course, as we've mentioned before, different species have different behaviors. So it's really important to understand how your local mosquitoes behave with your trap. And I was completely wrong about this once, wherein I don't even know if I have this as an example, but when in Namibia, we were doing sampling to figure out what the major vectors were. And across the border in Zambia, people were using CDC light traps to capture Anopheles arabiensis, the major vector. So I assumed that across the border in Namibia, we could use CDC light traps to capture Anopheles arabiensis. And I was completely wrong. The Namibian Anopheles arabiensis did not like the CDC light trap. And the second we put out a human landing catch, a second we used humans as bait, we caught a lot of Anopheles arabiensis. So I was wrong because I just assumed things without actually collecting the data to make a decision. So please don't do what I did. Collect your data and make a decision based on that. Different traps have their positive and negative points, and it's important to pick your sampling method based on your question. This is just a quick picture on if you're capturing live mosquitoes and you need live mosquitoes for downstream analysis, you need to transport them safely and make sure you have a really good SOP, a standard operating procedure, so that when you get to your lab or your insectary, your mosquitoes are alive. Usually you want to make sure that they're not shaken a lot, that you don't stress them out, that it doesn't get too hot or too cold. So you can see in this picture where they are placed in a styrofoam cooler and covered and probably on your lap. And if they're larvae, you really don't want to shake them around. So here's an example of data from Purworejo, Lampung, and Halmahera in Indonesia. And this has been published. And if you remember Brandy doing the HLC, she was collecting this data while I took that picture. So on the left of each little panel is indoors, and on the right in gray is outdoors. And at the bottom, on the x-axis, you have the same sampling methods, HLCs, CDC light traps, the Ifakara tent trap, resting boxes, and resting jars. And they're the same at every site. And we wanted to see which mosquito species were sampled with which trap. So inside in Lampung, we can see that the HLC caught the most indoors and the most outdoors. However, in Puerto Rico, we found indoors we weren't catching many with the HLC, but we were catching a lot in the HLC outdoors. Whereas in Halmahera, for 3 weeks, we were using HLCs and we didn't catch almost anything. But the second we put out a goat baited trend, we caught a lot of mosquitoes. So every site has its own species composition and its own species behaviors. And the sampling methods either matched or did not match to that sampling, to those mosquito behaviors. So it's super important, like unbelievably important, to base your sampling method based on what's happening in your location, because every location has different behaviors. Your sampling method you use can completely change your data, completely change your data. So it's important to collect the appropriate sampling method, right? And there we have done trap evaluations all over the world, like at a ton of sites. And in every single site, we start off by doing a short sort of evaluation of the sampling methods available to see which one would be most what the indicator we want to collect are, and then based on those indicators, see, we can use these sampling methods to collect the indicator. Let's see which one works best. And then we'll do a 1 week or a 2 week short little test to understand which one would collect the best data, because we want the best data to make the best decision. So here's an example of how sampling methods can completely change data. This is actually what happened at a country whose name I cannot mention. And they wanted to know, their question is IRS, is indoor residual spray effective at our site? And they did the standard measures, what WHO suggests to do. They went out and collected larvae and did insecticide resistance tests on that larvae, and they found that there was very low resistance. And so they said deltamethrin should work. Let's spray with deltamethrin. And they sprayed with deltamethrin, and malaria went up. And they're like, wait a second, the mosquitoes were susceptible. And we sprayed with deltamethrin. Why do we have more malaria now? So we did this sort of short assay to try and figure out what was happening, a short test. And we asked the questions, which species, we wanted to know which species were impacted by IRS, which species were susceptible to IRS. So we looked at the indicators, indoor resting, we looked at insecticide susceptibility, and our question was, did IRS impact any of these biting densities or resting densities, right? So we used, these are the sampling methods, outdoor HLCs, we used indoor. I'll go through everything we used and what data we found. In outdoor HLCs, we found species 1, which was susceptible to the insecticide. We found species 2, which was also susceptible. So species 1 and species 2 are susceptible. The insecticide would kill them, but they were outdoors. They were not found indoors, which means IRS would not impact them. We did indoor HLCs and window exit traps. So the indoor HLCs would tell us the mosquitoes that were going indoors to feed, and the window exit traps would tell us which mosquitoes were going indoor to feed and then leaving before the morning. Maybe those mosquitoes were not resting on the walls, right? Because they were leaving almost immediately after feeding. And species 2, which is also outdoors, species 2 was also going indoors. They were feeding and leaving. They were susceptible. So species 2 was not impacted by IRS because they were going indoors and leaving and not resting on the sprayed walls. Then we found species 3. In indoor HLCs, species 3 was going in. Species 3, in the PSCs, we found them resting on the walls, and species 3 was resistant. So can you see what was happening? Species 1 was outdoors, not going indoors, not being impacted. Species 2 was biting indoors and outdoors, but was not resting on the walls. So it was leaving, and it was not being impacted by IRS. And species 3 was going indoors, feeding on people, resting on walls, but was resistant to the insecticide. So even though the country did everything that WHO said to do, they collected larvae, and by the way, most of the larvae were species one and two. They were collecting larvae and collecting good data, but the data wasn't necessarily answering the question. The sampling method they used was not collecting the appropriate data to answer the question. So, this is just an example of how picking a sampling method or asking a very, very specific question, which species are impacted by IRS, instead of just asking, what is the insecticide resistance profile of larvae we capture at our site? Right? They're two completely different questions and two completely different outcomes that would have impacted decision making significantly. So, just as an important note when considering sampling methods, if you are using multiple sampling methods, like some of them might interact with each other. So, a lot of times, when we're doing a study, we want to look at indoor resting or as well as indoor biting rates. We don't want to have multiple sampling methods in one house. For example, if we're doing HLCs as well as PSCs, so HLCs will capture mosquitoes that are entering a house, indoor HLCs will capture mosquitoes that are entering a house and feeding and landing on people inside. And PSCs capture mosquitoes that are resting on the walls in the morning. So if we're doing PSCs and HLCs in the same house, all the mosquitoes that go inside and rest on and land on people to feed on them will be captured by the HLCs. Those mosquitoes will not get to rest on the walls, and those mosquitoes will not be caught in PSCs. So when you look at your data, your PSC numbers will be lower than what actually happens. So ideally, we'd have separate houses for PSCs and separate houses for HLCs. In addition, when we do PSCs, we spray the house with insecticide, right? And if the next day, if we, let's say, do an HLC in that house, the mosquitoes might be repelled by the insecticide and not enter that house. So again, we will capture less mosquitoes in the PSC sprayed house for a couple of days. Well-designed sampling can capture data that answers multiple questions, right? If you figure out what questions you want to ask, you can design your strategy, save money, design your sampling methods and surveillance method. I'm confusing myself. You can design your entomological surveillance to answer more than one question. And for example, HLCs can look at species compositions, can look at biting rate, can look at seasonality, can look at a bunch of things. Uh, Indoor aspirations can also look at species compositions of mosquitoes resting indoors, seasonality of mosquitoes resting indoors, right? You can answer multiple questions with the same with a well-designed sampling with multiple sampling methods. So if you go to table 8 of the ASPT, which is on page 20, you can actually see what questions or what indicators different sampling methods can collect. So here's a sampling method, which is HLC. The mosquito behavior that this method takes advantage of is human host seeking. The host preferences, oops, sorry about that. The host preference is the human. And then here's a question. Is this sampling method appropriate to collect data for these indicators? If it's dark green, it means yes. So for example, your human landing catch will not tell you what the larval habitat occupancy is, obviously, right? Your human landing catch will not tell you your indoor resting density. So it also cannot look at your human blood index because when you capture mosquitoes with a human landing catch, you're biasing your collections towards mosquitoes that can possibly feed on the human landing catcher, right? So that mosquito didn't have a choice to feed on a human or a cow. It just went straight to a human. So you're biasing those results. So everything in green is what that method might be suitable, what that method, oh, I'm confusing myself again. If that method is appropriate to collect data for a specific indicator. I need to read sometimes. So again, we have all the trapping methods, sampling methods listed on the left. We might be missing some, but this is more or less comprehensive. If you look at table 9 on page 21, it tells you the advantages and disadvantages of all these sampling methods. For example, let's look at the CDC, let's look at indoor resting collections, right? There are different kinds of them. And does it require standardization? No, right? Are the samples in good condition or bad condition? They're pretty good usually in indoor resting collections. Are they alive? Yes, you can collect them alive. So you can use this method if you need live mosquitoes for downstream analysis. So you can see the level of difficulty, etc. An important part is when we're using a sampling method to understand if an intervention is appropriate for your site, this means before putting that intervention in your site. If your question is, are bed nets an appropriate measure for intervention for our site? You can use these methods that are ticked. However, when you're evaluating the intervention, after you put the intervention in, you might want to use different sampling methods because they don't function the same. And you can see over here, we have the major WHO approved interventions listed, which are bed nets, IRS, and larviciding. We do need to update this to add in spatial emanators because now spatial emanators are conditionally approved by WHO. However, I am pretty sure that after this course, you will be able to fill this out yourself and understand it. But feel free to email me and I can send you an updated table. So when you're looking at these methods, a lot of times we take the samples back to lab, and there are multiple entomological the techniques that we could use in lab. Of course, all these methodologies and SOPs are available online, so I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I will list them out. Annex 3 provides more details on all these techniques. Uh, Entomological techniques would be Anopheles identification keys, identifying your mosquitoes morphologically to species. Then we have molecular identification using PCR. So you can do PCR or sequencing to understand what species you have. Salivary gland dissections to look at sporozoites. Ovarian dissections to look at parity rates. CS ELISAs to look at sporozoite rates. Here we look for sporozoite-related protein in an assay. Blood meal ELISAs to look at the host blood. So you can actually use ELISAs to understand what the mosquito fed on. We can use PCR to detect the parasite in the mosquito. And this is important. An important difference between PCR and ELISA is that with ELISA, we look for the presence of the sporozoite protein, and that is in the salivary glands, which means those mosquitoes or those parasites in those mosquitoes in the salivary gland are infectious. They can infect a human being. However, when you do PCR, you're looking for DNA. And when you're looking for DNA, it can be any parasite DNA. Let's say I'm a mosquito and I blood feed an infected person today. I'm not going to be infectious to another human being for another 10 to 14 days, if you remember from yesterday. However, because there's parasite DNA in me and I'm a mosquito and I'm squished up and my DNA extracted, and the PCR will come out positive. So there's a big difference between PCR-based parasite detection as well as ELISA-based sporozoite detection. The PCR will tell us the presence of DNA, as in that parasite was infected. Sorry, I made a mistake. The PCR will tell us the presence of DNA, which means the mosquito was infected with the parasite. However, the ELISA will tell us that the PCR was infected with the parasite and that mosquito is infectious to human beings. It can infect a human being. The next two are the WHO tube assay and the CDC bottle assays, and both these are used to understand insecticide resistance. The KDR, PCR, or biochemical assays, there are multiple, will tell us the molecular mechanism, possible molecular mechanism of insecticide resistance. And these are either PCRs or assays. The cone bioassay will tell us the amount of insecticide if it's still left on your bed nets, for example, or on your indoor residual sprayed walls. And we use susceptible mosquitoes to understand if it is still effective. So your optimal mosquito sampling method is based on what is the question? I would always recommend to sample mosquitoes based on the mosquito behavior trying to take advantage of, based on the indicator you're trying to collect, and always validate that sampling method with your local mosquitoes because every species and different species act different. And that is the end of my first presentation for today. Uh, I am trying to figure out where to stop share while I pull up my next presentation. Everyone take a breath. You have a second. Here we go. Leo, feel free to interrupt me at 1 hour.
Yeah, another 12 minutes to go, if that's okay with you,
Okay.
Neil.
Yeah, sure. Can you see my slide?
Yes, clearly. Thanks, Neil.
Perfect. So now that we have asked a question, we have selected our indicators based on our question and selected our sampling method based on our indicators based on our question. I'm going to be saying that a lot. Now we want to figure out what our sampling framework is. So here we are here in the sampling design. By the way, I have skipped site selection because your site selection is so based on your question and so specific to you that if you wanted to go through it in the ESPT, it is on there. You pick your site based on what your question is and what's going on around you. But there's lots of data on site selection in the ESPT. So now with your sampling design, right? How do we develop a sampling plan based on my question, based on the available capacity and resources? And it's really important to understand data standardization and quality, of course, because you want the best data to make the best decisions. So some key points are sampling sites, sampling units, and sample size. And I'm going to have a quick sip of water. Give me a second. The sampling site is the locality or location from where you're going to be sampling your mosquitoes to get the data, right? Your sampling unit is an individual unit for mosquito collection within your sampling site. So, for example, your sampling site can be a village and your sampling unit can be a house. And the sample size is the number of sampling units you collect data from. So, for example, we would collect uh, data from 5 houses, which is your sample size of 5, and your sampling unit is a house from 3 villages, and those are your 3 sampling sites. So the steps for your sampling design is pretty simple. I'm pretty sure you all get this. We do 5 things. The first thing is determine the sampling site, which village, which area, which larval site are we going to use? Then we determine the sampling unit. Then we select the sampling units. And over here, you can see we select these 2 houses. And then we factor in the sampling method, which we just talked about. So we won't go into detail here. And over here, we have, I don't know, maybe it's a mosquito leading a mosquito on a leash, a human on a leash, but I think that's supposed to mean an HLC. And then in the last step, we set the frequency of sampling as how often do we go back? So determine the sampling site, right? We want to know where we are going to be collecting data from. So your sampling site is based on our question. Let's say our question is, what are the mosquito species present in this area? And of course, we can go to absolutely every village. We could go to just a few villages, but based on your capacity and funding, you might want to limit this to representative sites, sites that represent different ecologies, or sites that are near a river, sites near a forest, sites in a really dry area, and maximize the number of sites that you can actually collect data from. This is an example of sites that were suggested to collect from across an area in Mozambique. You can see they are spatially spread apart so that we capture all the different mosquito species across this area. Of course, we don't have to do that. It would be dependent on your question. So here are three examples of questions, right? The first question is, where are the villagers in a specific village exposed to mosquitoes, right? So now we want to know where they're exposed to mosquitoes. So we want to look at the village and see where are people present during the biting times of Anopheles. And this can be based on the village, in the houses, outside the houses, in the surrounding forest areas. Suppose they have like forest camps or they have rice cultivation fields. Where are villagers being exposed to these mosquitoes? So, our sampling sites would be all these areas where people are present during mosquito biting times. I hope that made sense, right? It's based on your question. Let's say our second question is there are two health facilities and they are reporting high numbers of malaria cases. So, my question is, what are the entomological drivers of this outbreak? There's an outbreak there. What entomologically, what is causing it? So now all these people are reporting to these health facilities, right? And they're coming from the catchment areas, the villages surrounding these two health facilities. So any of these villages that are surrounding uh, these health facilities can be used. What I would do is probably go to those health facilities and look at the health records and see which villages have, or which areas, or which the localities have more cases coming from, and then select those areas as my sampling site. Yeah. Let's say the third question is there the presence or absence of insecticide resistance that is being used for IRS or bed nets or whatever intervention you're using in a specific areas? So I would probably go to those specific areas and collect data from there, right? Because I want to know if there's insecticide resistance in those areas. Normally, countries have sentinel sites, maybe. And if there are sentinel sites, I might just go to those sentinel sites to collect data. If there are no sentinel sites, I might start a site there and collect data from that site to answer that question. Here's an example of sites this is also Mozambique, where we collected data from. So they're spatially spread apart, there's higher malaria transmission, and you can see there are villages throughout the area, but we selected specific sites based on the amount of malaria to collect data from. The second step, determining the sampling unit. At our sampling sites, what sampling unit are we going to use? And of course, the sampling unit can be anything. The sampling unit is based on the indicator. For example, if we're looking at the human biting rate, it would be uh, bites per person per hour per house. And the house would be the sampling unit, right? So it can be a village, it could be a home, it could be water bodies for larval sampling, and so on. The unit that we use, for example, house, it must match up with your question. It must match up with your indicators, right? So if measuring the human biting rate, indoors and outdoors, your unit would be a single home, and you'll measure the biting rate indoors, and you'll measure the biting rate outdoors for that house. It is super important to have your sampling unit standardized across all your sites. If you're using human biting rate, you want it to be by house across all your studies, right? If you want to do it in cowsheds, that is a similar parallel study. But if you want to look at where Anopheles stevensii is biting humans, for example, you would select your cowshed as a sampling unit and your human house as a sampling unit. And you'd collect data inside and outside human houses and in cowsheds, right? So you'd have two types of sampling units to answer the same question. and you want to have the sampling standardized between all your entire study. I hope that made sense. So in table 12, we have example questions with possible sampling unit selection criteria. I say possible because this might change based on your site and your question. So let's say your question is, how is IRS affecting the indoor resting density of vectors, of malaria vectors? So the indicator is indoor resting density, the number of mosquitoes resting indoors per house. So your sampling unit is the house. Now you might choose different types of houses based on your question. So your question might be in sprayed houses, what's the indoor resting density, right? You might want different kinds of walls. Let's say you've sprayed in your villages, you have mud walls, you have walls made with concrete, you have tin walls or wood walls, and your indoor residual spray might impact each wall type differently. So you might want to choose different types of walls for your for your sampling unit. You might want to choose houses that with people or without people. I would choose houses with people usually because that's why mosquitoes are attracted to that house. So you can see how your specific program question has a sampling unit, but you might choose different sampling units based on what question you are trying to ask. The next question example is, what is the human biting location of Anopheles vectors in a specific village? Where are humans being bitten? So you'd probably ideally want to use your human biting rates and houses and other structures in the village. So where are people being bitten? So I'd use houses inside and outside houses, as well as areas where people are present during biting times. And you can, for example, in Zambia, we used outdoor cooking shelters where we found a lot of biting was happening. In Cambodia, we used like by the forest fringe where a lot of the people were hanging out, or in the forest when they were spending the night. So your sampling unit depends on your question. Oh, I forgot about all these animations. So you can imagine what I'm trying to say while I move through these animations. I already said it. The third step is to allocate the sampling unit. Now we want to pick which one of these sampling units we would use to collect data from. So it's the selection of sampling units that will be included in our study. Towards selecting the units, it's important or to consider historical data, right? What or where then the historical data would be which structures are sort of easy to access if people give permissions, which structures have more mosquitoes, are they open, are they closed, the types of the structures. And then the next step is how many of these sampling units can we actually use? What is the sample size? What is appropriate? So let's say in step one, we have the sampling site, which is a village. Step two, we figure out that our sampling unit is the house. And in step three, in this village of 3 houses, we have allocated 2 houses, just as an example. Right, here's a study. This is the Mozambique study again, where we were trying to figure out, here's the village we selected, the sampling unit was a house, and those are the the houses we selected to sample data from. Uh, just as a consideration, different houses attract different numbers of mosquitoes. We don't really understand why. It could be to do with the number of people in the house or the number of animals in that house, but we don't really understand why different houses attract different numbers of mosquitoes. So, if we use the same house to collect data over time, over a sentinel, for example, a sentinel house, we usually get data that is kind of better because we can see trends over time. If we picked a different house at each time, and let's say each house was normally just collecting different numbers of mosquitoes, our temporal data, our data over time, might not reflect the actual trends that are going on. If we wanted to select different structures over time, we might have to select a lot of structures. So, our confidence interval, our variability between structures go down. The next part is the sampling method, and we just went through this. Your sampling method definitely affects data quality, and if you're answering your question properly, Select your sampling method exactly like I described before. Let's assume it's already selected, and we know what sampling method we're going to use in our sampling unit. Now, the last step is setting the frequency of sampling. How often are we going to go back and collect data? And we can do this in so many ways. This is also depending on your question. For example, if our question is, what is the mosquito species composition over a year at our site? We probably want to go back over every season because mosquito species and their densities change by season. Usually, with rainfall, mosquito numbers go up, but at some sites, with rainfall, mosquitoes go down. For example, in hilly areas in Asia, the rainfall washes out all the larval sites and kills the mosquitoes. So, high rainfall results in lower numbers of mosquitoes. So, setting the frequency of sampling is dependent on your budget, right? And of course, your capacity and how many times you can go back. More frequent sampling is better because you go closer towards statistical significance, and it also improves representative data, right? But data quality, what matters more than quantity. So I would focus on collecting lesser, better quality data than more bad quality data. There are examples down here. Let's say for looking at frequency of sampling, and let's say over here we have 12 months of the year, 1 to 12, and let's say our mosquito transmission season is month 6 to 11, and the option one is we go every month to collect mosquitoes from, let's say, 4 houses for 4 days. So on month one, we go to a village, a sampling site. We select our sample, let's say 4 sampling units, and for 4 days we do collections. Or did I say 4 or 5? Let's say I said 4. So 4 houses, 4 days in month one, 4 houses, 4 days in month two, and so on. So we have standardized data collection over the year. Let's say we don't have enough money. We can go back every 2 months as like option two, or every 3 months as an option three. Or let's say we don't have any money at all, or we just want to find out, our question is, what are the vectors present, or our question is related to the transmission season. We can do option four, which is month 6 and 9. And of course, this is just an example. And understanding what your question is and what's relevant to your site will tell you the frequency, the ideal frequency of sampling. One thing we get a lot of, oh, I think I'm running ahead of myself, right? So again, as I just mentioned, sampling, the timing of sampling periods is based on your question and your available resources, right? Here's an example. The timing and frequency of sampling. And your question is, what is the residual efficacy of a new insecticide being used for IRS? So you want to find out how long the IRS
And,
lasts.
Neil,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm not sure. This is still step five, but I get the impression you're moving on to a new theme. So, is this a convenient time to stop, or do
sure.
you want to? Yeah,
Yes, let's stop for 10 minutes and then I can continue with this.
wonderful. All
Great.
right. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Neil. Thank you so very much. Let's break for 10 minutes, stretch your legs, go and get a cup of tea, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes from now. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye bye.
No.
Another 1 minute, Dr. Poon, please. Okay, Neil, I'm not sure if you are ready.
Yes, I am.
All right. Okay. So back to you, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thank you. While I pull up my slides, I can tell you that my break consisted of eating a very delicious donut.
Not very healthy, Neil, but very filling, I'm sure, and very
I was
pleasant.
hungry. I was hungry. Okay, do you see my slide?
Yes, clearly. Thanks,
Thank you.
Neil.
Yes. So we were here over here about setting the frequency of sampling. So how often do we go and collect our mosquitoes, right? So for example, if our question is, what is the residual efficacy of a new insecticide being used for IRS? We want to find out how long the insecticide lasts on the sprayed walls. So, if you have enough funds, one of the options is to sample immediately after spraying, right? And collect data every month. Every month, do cone bioassays on sprayed walls until 80% mortality, right, is achieved. Until the mortality is below 80%, as in less than 80% of the mosquitoes survive. But if you have less funds, what you can do is don't start immediately after spraying, but do it every 2 months or so, right? Until mortality is below 80%. So based on your budget, you can actually figure out how often to go back, but still get the best data possible. So here is a slide on how much we actually need to sample. And this is so complicated. I get asked this all the time. And to tell you the truth, it is a work in progress. It depends on your site. It depends on your mosquitoes. It depends on so many things. But conceptually, I was hoping this might help us understand how much do we actually need to sample. So academic studies, when you're doing it academic research, we want statistical significance, right? And usually for statistical significance, we have to sample a whole lot. But when we're doing operational studies, when we're doing studies for ministries of health, decide for decision making on what insecticide to use, where is our transmission coming from, right? Then we need representative data. We need data that is representative of our geography. We do not necessarily need statistically significant data. Statistically significant data is the best data possible, but we don't have the funds. We can't collect at like 100 sites, right? Can collect at maybe two or three. But how do we collect enough data that is representative, that we can make decisions on? We want to maximize data quality with limited funds, right? To make good decisions. So on this figure here, now bear with me while I try and explain this. Each dot represents the number of mosquitoes from X number of houses. Right here at the bottom left, sorry, on the y-axis is the mean number of mosquitoes, And then the x axis is the number of houses sampled, right? And the dot represents the average number of mosquitoes from all those houses. So right here is one house was sampled. So one house, we get this many mosquitoes, this many mosquitoes, this many mosquitoes, right? And all the way from 16 to about 5 mosquitoes. You can see there's a big range. Now, if we take two houses at a time and average them out, the range, it's not 16 and 5, it's between about 14 and let's say 9. And as we sample more houses, the mean or the average becomes less. The variation between our samples become less. So as we go out and collect more and more and more houses, we get less variation as we do the mean. And at 200 houses, we get about, let's say, 11.5 mosquitoes per house. That's probably the best data we can get. We and no one has enough money. Well, maybe they do, but I don't have enough money to collect mosquitoes from 200 houses every month. But if you move left, you can see that at what point is the data good enough? At what point is the data representative? And this is what your budget and your capacity will tell you. If you just collect from one house, you're going to have a huge variation and you won't really know what is representative. But let's say around over here, let's say around 50 houses, you can see, yep, it's around 11.5, 12, and that shouldn't change your decision making too much. And if you go slightly left at 25 houses, you can see it's, oh, about the same. So, but slightly more variation. And so, based on your site, this is based on a very specific site. So your site might have a completely different looking figure. I just wanted to represent and show you how most sampling can be much better, right? But you want your sampling to be representative. And as an example, here is the mosquito species that we found at a site. We have Anopheles phonesis, Gambier maculopalpus, and so on. All these species, 9 of them. These are the numbers of each species. We got the most of Anopheles phonesis, and this is for 1 month of the year. And then, sorry, we got the most of Anopheles gambier, and we got, you can see just one Anopheles squamosus and one Anopheles tenebrosus, right? This is over one, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, not over 1 month, over one transmission season. And so now, if we look at this data statistically, and next year, our question is, how many mosquitoes do we need to sample to get all these species? If we want to collect at least one of each of these species to say they're still there, right? We are looking at species composition. Question is, what is the species composition? On year 1, we captured all these mosquitoes. Year 2, we want to see if we can capture all these mosquitoes. Statistically, right, we need to capture 4,750 mosquitoes to sample at least one of every one of them. That is a lot of mosquitoes. We did not collect that many mosquitoes in year 1, right? So this is probably going to be out of our budget. This is an academic exercise. This is too expensive, right? However, if my question changes to, are my primary vectors there? To collect at least one of the primary vectors, which are Phonestis gambier and maculopalpus, we need to collect about 40 mosquitoes, right? And this should give us good enough data, and this would be statistically significant. So you can see how, based on your question, you can sample differently to get the best data possible. Of course, in this first figure, it is what is the species composition? All of them, we want to catch at least one of all species to see if they're there. The second question is just what is happening with our primary vectors? Are our primary vectors there? Right? So you can see how a different question, a different approach, you'd want to use a different sampling framework. So again, what is your question? You can adapt your question to your budget. So if you remember this figure again, I'm just trying to make another example here. Let's say this is what happens at all your houses, the number of mosquitoes you catch at all the houses. If you sample 200 houses, it's here. If you sample one house, it's all the way on the left. This is what happens before your intervention. And let's say we conduct an intervention, let's say it's spatial emanators, and we put spatial emanators at our site, and we expect our mosquito numbers to go down, right? Now, this data is completely made up. I took this figure of real data and duplicated it and moved it slightly down. So it's not real data. But I hope you can see visually, right? Visually, the top that is before your intervention, and the bottom below is after the intervention. Your mosquito numbers have gone down. Now, if your question is, what is the impact my intervention had on mosquito numbers, right? You can see if we collect the number of houses towards the left, if we collect 25 houses, which is right here, you're not going to see a big difference. You might see a shift, but you won't see a big difference. Whereas if you collected 200 houses, you are going to clearly see a difference. You're going to see 10 mosquitoes versus 11.5. Again, this is made up data. I mean, this figure is made up. So you'd probably, if you wanted to see a distinct difference, you'd probably want to collect at maybe between 56, 75 houses should give you a bit of a difference. Of course, it's better to do 150, but if you just collect at maybe 12, 15 houses, you may not get enough data, right? To be able to show a distinct difference between before your intervention and after intervention. Again, this data is completely made up, and you might just need 5 houses to be able to see the difference. I just wanted to make a point here. So again, what is your question? And you can figure out how much sampling you need to do. So at this stage, we have basically worked our way a ton through the ESPT, and we went through what is our question, right? We've learned how to select minimal essential indicators to answer our question, then the sampling method to collect our indicators to answer our question. We did not go through site selection because that's so specific and that is outlined in the ESPT. And then what sampling design that we just went through. And the last step, now that we've made our ideal and perfect entomological surveillance plan, now we want to figure out if it's actually feasible. Do we have enough money and funds? So those are all our steps: question, indicators, sampling methods, site selection, and sampling design. And we've made our ideal surveillance plan. Now, do we have enough funds and capacity? And here is where we can go back. If we don't have the funds and capacity, we go back. We keep our question as is. We go back and look at our indicators. Did we need every single one of those indicators to collect to answer our question? If we needed them, we keep them there. Then we look at the sampling methods. If we use 2 sampling methods, can one sampling method answer our question, right? Site selection would probably remain the same, but let's say we have 5 sites. Maybe we should reduce it to 2 sites to reduce the cost. Sampling design, if we're going back every month for a whole year, maybe every 2 months, maybe every 3 months. So from this method, once we get this ideal plan, we can adapt it to fit within our funding and capacity. And by capacity, I mean the number of people to run the study. Do we have enough cars and vehicles to take people to the sites? Do we have enough people in lab processing the samples? All that has to be figured out in your entomological surveillance plan. So that was a quick presentation on sampling. Uh, that we've basically at this point been through the ESPT. And now I'm going through a couple of other things that are really important. Oops, I started my screen without sharing it. And there are a couple of different concepts that we will go through a couple of slide sets and finish off today. Uh, so managing entomological data. This is so important. Imagine you have run through this whole process and collected a ton of really good data, maximized everything you could do with a minimal budget. You've collected all the data that'll answer your question. You've spent days and days out in the field, no sleep for like weeks and weeks, and then you send your data in and someone doesn't look after it well. Oh my God, I would get so mad. So, anyway, so this is just about how to make sure all your entomological data, your surveillance plans, all your efforts are actually looked after well. So, when you're preparing for entomological data collection, it's really important to get a couple of things done. First of all, make sure you have appropriate data collection forms, right? The forms in which you collect your data. There are three steps to this, right? The first step is to identify which data collection forms you need. For example, if you're doing HLCs, you need an HLC data collection form. These are available, I think, yes. Uh, Whoops, sorry, I'm going ahead. These are available, and we will go through that in a second. Once you get these forms, you want to make sure you adapt them for your specific activities and then make data dictionaries. I'll go through each of these steps. So every activity, every single thing you do needs a form. It needs an SOP, a standard operating procedure, and a form. This ensures that all the data you collect is standardized between sites, between collections, between people, between everything, so that when you analyze it, it's all collected in the same way with the same definitions, the same timelines, same everything. That is the only way of collecting and analyzing good data. Without that, you really can't use it. So, for example, your insecticide resistance test assays require a specific form. And here's an example of it down here. This is for the CDC bottle assay. So, all these forms, let's say you're doing this for the first time. Most people, not most people, a lot of people have already done these. A lot of people already have forms for whatever activity you're doing. You do not have to start from scratch. Use the forms other people have made to understand what to include in your forms. You can get these from the CDC, from PMI, from me, from WHO. There are existing entomological data forms available, and you can use them as templates to make your own forms, to make them optimal for yourself, right? For example, if human behavior observations, which is sort of a new thing in our field, well, it's not that new, but perhaps new to some people. And as we talked about yesterday, they are so important. So let's say you want to make a form for it. You do not have to start from scratch. They're available in the ESPT. Email me, I will send them to you. I'm happy to send anyone anything. You can use them as a template and adapt them for your specific needs and things that you want to measure. Here's an example of the human behavior observation form, right? It says your locality, your district, your region, your supervisor's name, the collection date, the house number, and so on. But for example, at your site, locality might be called district, and district might be called village, and region might be called state or something like that. So you'd want to adapt all these things. Here is your hour of observation is from 6 to 7 p.m. Maybe you want to start at 5, right? Maybe you want to go 6 to 8 p.m. instead. And maybe this is people collecting data inside or outside. It might be location inside, right? You might want to put outside locations as well, right? So based on the form available, you want to adapt it for your own use. Oh, I already animated this and I forgot about it. But imagine what I'm saying as I animate this. The third step is unbelievably important. Each data collection form is made up of column headers, right? The column header, if you look in the previous form, which is the hour of observation, the name of the observer, and so on, right? If you ask 5 people to make up the same form, the 5 people individually and by themselves will make up 5 completely different forms. And they will name the column headers completely differently, right? The human miting rate might be HBR, might be mosquitoes per person per hour. It could be many things. So you want to do this in a standardized way. So a data dictionary enables you to understand exactly what each column header means. An easy thing that can be mixed up, for example, is how we do dates, right? In Asia, a lot of the times we do the day, the month, and then the year. Whereas in the US, for example, they do the month and then the day and the year. And you can imagine how easily that data can be mixed up. And if we're doing an analysis on seasonality of mosquitoes, if I mix up the month and the day, your data is completely wrong. So just simply putting that into the data dictionary is super important. And for example, you can just take, I have an example in the next sheet, I think. Let's say this is a data collection form, and you can see there's column headers in each. Each of these mean a specific thing. And when you look at this, this is also important. You have probably no idea what this means because I made this form up. Now, if I send you this form, you need to know what it means. So I don't want you calling me or WhatsApping me or emailing me every 20 minutes. Neil, what does collection method mean? What does LT indoor mean? Or what is ITS2 contig? I don't understand. Why is 595 out there? What does that mean? I don't want to be bothered. I want to give you all the information required for you to function without me. So what we do is we basically take these column headers, right? The top row, and we flip it. Oops, sorry. What did I do? Sorry, we take the column headers and we flip it. So you can see the column headers are down here. And we write everything to do with this collection on there. So for example, over here, I wrote on this extra Excel sheet that is attached to the data, I say the contact person is Neil Lobo. Who is responsible for this? It is me. The person responsible has to put their name on that data sheet. And this is the study, this is the date of data collection, the collection site. This is from Myanmar. And over here, we have the data dictionary. The top headings are the column header, the explanation, and the variables. And all the remaining things are basically flipped. Can you see that? SR number, code number, whoops, and so on. So each one of these is listed, SR number, code number, morphological identification. This explains what it is. So ND code means it's the Notre Dame code. It's the code that we in my lab put for each sample, right? If we look at collection method, you can see collection method out here. Collection method, we list the types of collections. LT means light trap, PSC means pyrethroid spray, sheet collection, HL, that should human landing catch outdoors. And this is what they named them in Myanmar. So this way, no matter who I send the data to, they will be able to understand exactly what is what. This is unbelievably important. And anyone who does not do this, I usually send the data back. Anyone in my lab who sends me data without a data dictionary, I send the data back. Also, it's kind of important. Sometimes we have different languages in different countries. So here is the same data dictionary in two languages, in English on the left and in French on the right. So a person who's, let's say, doesn't know French so well, collects the data, I send the data to him or her. He can see this means I can't even pronounce this. Nom du site is just the name of the site. I could pronounce that, I think. So you can have your data dictionary in two languages. One thing I also do is in a data sheet, let's say in an Excel sheet, never leave a cell blank. Never leave a cell blank because the person doing analysis does not know if what that cell means. It could mean I did not know the answer, so I didn't put it in. It could mean I lost the data. It could mean zero. It could mean so many things. So for empty cells or cells that might remain empty, I always have a code in there. For example, -91 means don't know. -92, these are just the codes I made up for myself. You can make up your own codes. -92 means, let's say I did a PCR and it did not work. Instead of leaving it blank, I would put -92, which means the reaction did not work. Let's say the data or the sample was missing. Instead of leaving it blank, put a -98 in there. So when you're doing analysis, you know what the denominator is for your analysis, right? You'd know everything about every cell. Let's say the data was not collected, it means it's -99 in my code. And you can see that is in both languages. So when you're looking at data management, right? Wait, did I go back or forward? Yeah, when you're looking at data management, you enter your data, You want to have quality checks and data cleaning, and then you store your data on a database, right? Data entry and cleaning is so important again. You've spent hours and days and nights without sleep in the field. Someone, whoever's in lab, needs to please, please, please look after that data really well. The first step is to enter the data and make sure it looks good. Make sure that all mistakes are removed, right? You want to clean and check the data to catch errors so that the best data is available for analysis. Here is an example of a data sheet. It's actually a screenshot from a data sheet where I saw a whole bunch of mistakes. Now I'll give you a couple of seconds to look at this data sheet and find mistakes. How about 5 seconds? See how many mistakes you can find. Okay, time up. Here is one. Can you see that? Is there the start time is 23:02. That is a mistake in the time entry, in the time. And here is, was it raining? YN, what does that mean? Is it yes or a no? Right? That's what YN means. Over here is an empty cell. We should not have an empty cell. If the data wasn't collected, put in the code for data not collected. And over here, the temperature was 300 degrees. Oh God, I hope it wasn't. But the temperature apparently was 300 degrees from 10 to 11 that night. That needs to be corrected. So going through the data to ensure that the data is entered correctly and corrected for analysis is really important. So data storage, after your data is cleaned up, you'd want to have basically three kinds of data. Your raw data that you collect from the field, and that will be saved as raw data. Then you clean up your data, and that is your clean data. And then there's de-identified data, right? De-identified data is data where personal information is removed. Depending on your type of data, you might collect human-based data. For example, if you're doing questionnaires, you'll be collecting a person's name, the number of people that live in their house, and all kinds of personal information. If you think about it, I personally do not want my information available to everyone or anyone in other countries and strangers I don't know, right? And the responsibility of this is usually with institutional review boards. So you take your protocols and your studies and you pass them through institutional review boards. And their job is to protect human subjects, human subject research. And depending on the type of data you collect, you might want to have de-identified data where the human-centric data is removed or coded or taken out. So it just depends on what kind of data you have. A lot of times, entomological data does not have human data, but it's important to just realize that this might be part of what you're collecting, and you want to make sure you protect that data. So you protect the people we are actually doing the research for. Their communities are allowing us into their houses, into their communities, working with them. They welcome us. We need to protect them as well. We're doing this work for them. Another thing to do is to keep every version of data, your raw data, your clean data, and your de-identified data. And based on your IRB, based on your permissions, you can share or not share the data out. And keep these versions for as long as required by the IRB, but make sure only people who are allowed to access that specific type of data are allowed to access that specific type of data, right? Yep, and that was my last slide for data management. I'm going to have a quick sip of water and talk about something else, data visualization. Uh, Here we go. Can you see my slide? I hope you can see my slide. So now that we have spent hours and days and weeks in the field without any sleep collecting all these mosquito data, we have cleaned up our data, we have analyzed our data, and now us as entomologists need to present our data. And here is something I find really frustrating. A lot of times, Like, I think this data is so cool, and I think it is really, really important. And I'm presenting it to someone who is going to make a decision, who is going to say, yes, we need to procure new bed nets. Or, yes, let's give you this amount of funding to do your entomological surveillance. And they are absolutely not interested in the data I'm presenting. Or they're not just not interested, they just don't even understand it. So, how do we visualize and present our data in a manner that gets us what we need and gets our bosses or the people who are presenting the data, gives them the information they need to make the best decisions for them? So, a challenge is the effective communication of the meaning of our data, of our entomological surveillance data, to non entomologists who might be experts in their field and also decision makers. So, just an example, the three figures below say the same thing. And if you recognize presentations from yesterday, the left is the raw human behavior and the raw mosquito data. The middle is the human behavior adjusted data. And then the right is the same thing, but in a pie graph. Now, which of these figures would be the easiest for a non-expert to understand, right? So all these things we have to consider. We have to consider what the other person understands and the other person gets. And here are some important things to me, which is what I try and follow. The first step is know your audience. Who am I presenting to? What is their evidence? So, I mean, what is their expertise? What is their experience? And based on the Ministry of Health, just as an example, some people in the Ministry of Health understand everything. They understand far more than me. They have a better grasp of things, and you can be as detailed as you want to. And some of them don't. And if we present detailed HLC capture rates, their eyes glaze over and they want a donut. They want to do something else. I'm looking at a donut in front of me right now. Anyway, so we need to focus on what they need to know and leave out what's not relevant. Just because I think it's cool does not mean I need to put it into the presentation, right? What is the objective of my presentation? What is my goal? Here's the person I'm presenting to. What am I trying to tell this person? Am I trying to tell the person we need to get a new insecticide, or we need to change from bed nets to IRS or bed nets to spatial laminators? Present just that data that demonstrates to them that that is the important. This is the data that will persuade them to make this specific decision, right? For example, if your target audience do they understand scientific SOPs or analysis methods? If they don't, absolutely do not present a detailed SOP or a detailed analysis unless they ask for it. Don't do it. Then the data, right? Your data has to be relevant, it has to be accurate, and it has to be provided in context, right? As I just mentioned, the first step is to only present the data that supports your objective and answers your question. Present only that data. The second is data that's accurate. Do not make stuff up. Present exactly what the data you collected was and what the analysis was. For example, let's say we have months 1 to 12, and in reality, we did not collect the green data. In reality, there are 5 mosquitoes per person per month. There are 10 mosquitoes per person per month, or whatever. This is what's happening really. But the actual data is we only collect in month 3 and month 9, right? So if we take our data, this is what's actually happening, but that's the data we collect. So if we were going to present, I would only present those 2 blue bars and I would not join the lines up. Does that make sense? Because joining the lines up is not what the green is. The green is actually what is correct, but joining the lines is fake. I would just present these 2 bars, and because we don't have the green data, I'd present the 2 blue bars. So present what you collect and present it accurately. And the third step is context, right? We want to present context so that the audience, the people who are presenting the data to, knows what it means. If I give you this figure and I just put it up on screen, you're going to look at it and be like, okay, what is 1 to 12? What is 0, 10, 20, and 30? I have no idea what it is. What does series two mean, right? So from a person who's looking at this screen and maybe they're listening to me and trying to understand this figure, they have no idea what it means. So what do we do? The questions are, what is the x-axis, the y-axis, right? So I try, and sometimes I fail, but I try and always explain. The x-axis means this, and the y-axis means this, and this is what the figure means. I try and do that, and I make mistakes sometimes, so forgive me for that if I didn't. But it's important to let your audience know exactly what you're presenting. And over here, here's an example of malaria cases, January through December 2023. And you can understand this is the month. January is 1, 12 is December. The malaria cases peaked in June, and the total number of malaria cases. So this is an easy way of, explaining a figure and making it contextual. This figure could have easily been misinterpreted as the number of mosquitoes per person per hour or per night or per month, right? I hope you get that. But this actually meant, I made this data up as as an example, but this data actually meant the number of malaria cases. Another thing to do is to present simply and clarify things when asked. Do not have super complicated figures like this one. It's a really cool figure. If my objective is to say, suppose I'm trying to say, malaria is transmitted between humans and mosquitoes, and I put up this figure, everyone in the audience is going to be like, what is that about? But if I just do that simple, very light figure, you can see malaria is transmitted between mosquitoes, the Anopheles vectors, and the human host, the Plasmodium parasite. And that's just the simplest thing I could draw up in 2 minutes that explains exactly what's on the right, but it makes it much easier to understand from a non-expert perspective. Uh, Use consistent scales. This is important. When we're presenting two things, for example, let's say this is the monthly Anopheles capture. Your y-axis is the number of mosquitoes, and the x-axis is the month. This time I remembered to explain the x and y-axis. This is site A and this is site B. And when you just look at the figure, it looks like, oh, wait, site A and site B have about the same mosquitoes. But an important difference. Do you notice that? The number, the scales on both figures. On one of them, it is 600, and on one of them, it's only 60. So when you just look at the figure, it looks like, oh, site A and site B have the same mosquitoes. But when you actually put them on a graph together, that's exactly what's happening. It's quite different. So use consistent scales so that when a person looking at your presentation, looking at your slides sees it, visually, you can actually look at the differences. And if you don't want to do that, point it out specifically and say, the scales, for example, the scales here are vastly different, and there are 10 times more mosquitoes at site A. I hope that made sense. So another thing is too much text. Too many slides have too much text, and this kills me. For example, if I this how many of y'all looked at the slide and was like, I do not want to read that, right? All of y'all are like, I do not want to read that. If any of you looked at the slide and thought, I want to read this whole slide, I'm sorry, yeah, you're a freak because I do not want to read it. So it's important to design your slides for readability. Make sure the text size is big enough. Make sure the type is not too complicated. It's a simple lettering, like Arial or something like that. Have clear titles and labels. Some people are colorblind, and I make this mistake a lot. I use, for example, red and green on the same slides, and there are sites online in which you can use to understand if your slides can be viewed by someone who's colorblind. And so change your colors based on that. The less text, the better. The more pictures, the better. Always. For example, this slide, all that text is not that great. And all that text is represented in this simple figure. I was trying to say, which interventions do we need to implement in a site with low bed net coverage? We want to look at human behaviors, mosquito behaviors, and bed net presence and usage. We understand where people are being protected, where people are being bitten, and indoors what might work, and outdoors might what work. And all that is represented in this text. Which would you rather look at? Right? So be simple in what you are trying to represent. Always make it into a story, right? We start off with this. People are interested in stories. They are not interested in data being thrown at them. They are more interested and will pay more attention if you make a story. Draw a flow chart. Imagine how all your data was collected and what the story is about your data. And it's represented in this flow chart here. What are the key takeaways, right? Say that. So, in summary, I just said, what are the key takeaways? And the next slide is the key takeaways. The key takeaways are know your audience. Data should be relevant. Make sure your slides and your presentations are simple, designed for readability, basically visually simple, and try and make it into a story. I think that's my last slide for that. Uh, I hope that was useful because we actually technically usually miss out a lot on that. Leo, are we at 2 hours now? I think we are, right?
Neil,
Yeah.
we're at 45 minutes into this particular session, but that's
Uh-huh.
okay. That allows us some
Oh,
question and
yeah.
answer time. Have you got
Perfect.
anything else? Would you rather we cut off at this point, which is
Oh,
fine with
yeah.
me?
Would you mind if we went into questions and answers and we can have more time for that? I think some of these slides I went through rather quickly, and I needed to slow down.
All
As you
right.
know, yeah, so I need to slow down for tomorrow.
Excellent.
So,
Okay, thanks, Neil. I've culled some questions. I just
perfect.
need to find out how to, oh yeah, different platforms have different ways of sharing screen. So, all right. Neil, can you
Yes.
see? You can
Ah,
see my
I-
screen.
yes. The
All right.
first question I see is,
Let
why
me
is
just,
it important to consider the wall types, such as mud, bricks, etc., for mosquito collection to see
correct.
the effect of IRS? Oh,
Okay.
this is a great question. So sometimes different walls have different consistencies. For example, brick walls are porous and your IRS can be absorbed into it. Mud walls can actually be, when you spray mud walls with IRS, it can be washed off really easily. Or it can be just flake off. So your IRS doesn't last as long. Concrete walls, it might last much longer. And wood walls or really hardwood wood walls, it might not even stick much. So each of these wall types, the IRS might last for different amounts of time. For example, in a really absorbing wall type, it might last for 6, 7 months. I'm making up numbers here, but it might last much longer than a mud wall where everything just gets brushed off or washed off. So understanding the effect of IRS, the longevity of IRS, the duration of impact of IRS on different wall types is actually quite important. I hope that answered the question.
Here's an interesting, slightly different one. How is
Yeah.
sampling done in urban environments? For example, in Stevens Eye
Yeah.
situation, there may be multi-story buildings and
Yeah.
complicated. So just your reaction to that, Neil?
Okay, are we talking about Anopheles mosquitoes? Okay, so if we're doing sampling in urban surveillance, let's say we're looking at Anopheles. So usually most Anopheles do not live in urban areas, except for Anopheles stevensii, though we are consistently finding more Anopheles arabiensis and other species in slightly more urban areas. With these Anopheles species, we would look at what best, as we mentioned with sampling methods, what is the best sampling method to capture those target species at my site. I would evaluate the different sampling methods to see which is most effective. And with Anopheles stevensii, the easiest way of collecting them is usually larval sampling, because that seems to be the best way of sampling them and getting the most numbers of them. But also things like pyrethroid spray catches might work. They're most effective in cowsheds and then less effective in human structures. But based on the vector you're targeting, based on which sampling method works best on that, I would select them. In multi-story buildings, in those are very, very urban areas, you normally don't find many Anopheles stevensii. But I would do the same thing, right? Go see how high up the people are actually being infected and do your sampling measures across the board. Go ask for permission and look at their balconies, put up traps in the balconies or inside the houses based on where exposure is happening. With ADs in urban environments, you can actually do a lot of larval sampling all the way up multi-story buildings, and we find them pretty high up in multi-story buildings. For example, we're doing a study in Dhaka in Bangladesh, and we're going to be doing sampling of mosquitoes, both larvae and adults, across these multi-story buildings. Yeah, so again, depends on your question, your vector, and how your vector interacts with your sampling measure. Yes.
So, Neil, so here's a question basically asking, does flight range come into consideration when considering sampling sites and so on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe just respond to considering mosquito flight range differences, what could be the scientific justification for
Yeah.
spatial distances between our sampling sites to avoid significant overlaps? I'm just reading it for the benefit of the
Yeah.
audience so they hear the question.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. This is a great question, and we are all thinking about this for multiple studies. So, mosquitoes, there's not much data on this, but data from Africa suggests that mosquitoes can fly up to 2 kilometers in a day, which is quite far. So, if you want absolute separation, you might want your sites to be about 2 kilometers apart. But in practice, we found that like 200 meters to half a kilometer might work okay. But also, if you're looking at things like larviciding, right, you might want considerably more distances. And this is really hard to understand because there's not much data on it. If a mosquito flies 2 kilometers in a day, how far can they fly in 1 week, right? They'll stop, rest, feed, rest, lay eggs, fly some more. They could fly considerable distances over time. So, again, what is your question? How might these flight ranges impact your data quality, right? Are all important when considering the distance between your sites. Depending on your type of study, right? Normally, with for example, at a clinical trial with an intervention and control arm, we have ideally 1 to 2 kilometers, but sometimes it can be less. I hope I answered your question. It wasn't really an answer, but it's just the talking about how data is not available on that.
Yes,
Yeah.
I find this question very interesting because I'm also guilty of this. I over
Yes.
collect data. So, if you're doing hourly sampling of mosquitoes, I always collect wind speed
Right.
and rainfall and temperature. So the question is, what's the value, the merit, the benefit of collecting all these, environmental parameters? Uh, I could answer, but they want an answer from you, Neil.
Oh,
So
I would love to hear your answer, Leo, and I will respond.
okay, so now you're putting me on the spot. So
Absolutely.
um, you know, sorry, I forget to pose this question. It's very important to understand that Anopheles arabiensis in Africa, for example, it's been shown through studies, and I've confirmed this in my own work as well. Interestingly, a breeze that exceeds about 2 meters per second, and that's not a strong breeze, it's just a slight breeze, will cause a suppression in the activity of Anopheles arabiensis and almost certainly many other vector species as well. So you look at your mosquito catches throughout the night and you notice that if you didn't record wind speed, then you don't understand why there was lower numbers of mosquitoes at a particular time slot during the night. You assume it's because mosquitoes just have a diurnal rhythm that they're not biting at that time of night, whereas in fact it was wind speed. And so there are, the different temperature impacts on biting intensity, etc. Neil, do you want to comment further?
Yeah, you're right, Leo. You're right. Temperature, rainfall, relative humidity, wind speed impact mosquito biting rates. They impact mosquito behavior. You're right. And if your question that you're trying to ask looks at the association between all these non-entomological factors and the entomological endpoint you are trying to measure, for example, biting rate, as Leo mentioned, you might want to collect this data and analyze it in conjunction with that data, right? And usually, when we analyze it, we see the relationships. If your decision you're trying to make has nothing to do with temperature, then you might just be collecting extra data, even though your temperature is impacting the data you're collecting. But it's up to you, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Neil. So let me read this. Given that the CDC light trap efficacy depends critically on placement, for example, foot of the bed, indoors, outdoors, presence of humans, what standardized protocol minimizes variability, and how do we interpret data when protocols inevitably deviate in real-world settings? So there was a second question, very similar. Is it ideal to place a CO2 baited or a CDC light trap adjacent to a sleeping person?
Mhm.
If you can just talk around that
Yeah.
topic, Neil.
Sure.
Thank you.
So you are correct that placement of your sampling method will impact your captures, right? And usually we standardize what we do. For example, a person sleeping under a bed net, and we place the CDC light trap outside the bed net by the person's feet, like to maybe 3 feet above the ground. So you want a standardized measurement to do, a standardized protocol. This can differ from site to site based on the person or the data, people collecting the data, and I would definitely standardize it amongst all our collections. If there is a deviation from the protocol, I would definitely write it down and see if the data also deviates associated with that protocol deviation. You want to try and maintain standardized procedures throughout. The second question is it ideal to place a CO2-baited CDC light trap adjacent to a sleeping person? I don't think this is usually done. I have not seen both a sleeping person and a carbon dioxide being used to attract mosquitoes. I would possibly just use carbon dioxide or just a sleeping person. I have not seen this done in my experience because you're using two sources of bait, carbon dioxide, and the person sleeping is producing carbon dioxide anyway.
Here's a question. So you get different kinds of CDC light traps. You get incandescent light bulbs, you get UV tube lights,
Yeah,
and you get those little, what are those little diodes,
yeah.
which also have a UV component. So what light color would be more preferable? Because they do differ. In your
Yeah.
opinion, Neil?
So I don't know what's preferable because it depends on what the mosquitoes prefer, not me. So I would evaluate each of these different things and see what works best. For example, in the Kenya highlands, when we used a UV, CDC light trap with UV, it caught the most species, but it caught less species with just the normal CDC light you get with the light trap. I would evaluate it and see what works best based on your question. I cannot answer that question.
Yeah, I agree with Neil there that the UV light attracts many more mosquitoes on average than a little incandescent
Yeah,
light bulb. But you also get a whole lot of other insects, extra insects that are attracted to the UV light. So, but in general, the UV light will attract more mosquitoes.
correct.
Um, Given the diversity of sampling methods, each requiring different skills, equipment, and protocols, how does a resource-limited national program realistically decide which methods to prioritize, train staff on, and sustain over time without becoming overwhelmed by complexity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first point I would say is that an entomologist being part of your staff would make things considerably easier because that entomologist should be trained and know all these and should be able to use his knowledge and experience to train people. The second thing is if a program has a standardized set of questions they're trying to measure over time and a standardized sort of framework for evaluating and understanding what's happening within the national system, the country doesn't have to have too many sampling methods and too many different skills required. You can focus in on a strategic and really good surveillance plan that actually answers multiple questions without the need for multiple deviations. And it can still be adaptable to answering multiple questions and responding to what's happening in the field. If you have a sort of a question or what the country wants to answer, I can absolutely support with trying to figure out what's a minimal set of indicators and sampling methods to use. At the least, it would be at the least, if you have bed nets and IRS, you'd want to do indoor resident collections and understand your uh, human landing rates by CDC light trap or by human landing catchers and your human behavior observations. That's the least number of things that would be pretty easy to implement.
Here's one that's very,
Yeah.
very important to field entomologists, especially in Africa. Are there good alternatives to dry ice, given that the CDC light trap is hugely more effective if you combine
Mhm.
it with dry ice? So, but dry ice is not easy to access in outside of main cities and
Yeah,
so on. So, are there good alternatives to dry ice? For example, yeast and CO2
correct.
bottles. What's your experience, Neil?
Yeah, so in my experience, we've been using, well, dry ice, CO2 containers, as well as you mentioned here, sugar and yeast. The issue is with sugar and yeast, even though it's effective, it might not be standardized and produce the same quantity of carbon dioxide over time. And there are people that'll come in and steal the alcohol at the end. But each one of them has their pros and cons, and I would see what fits into your budget, what you can manage, and then make sure you're running a standardized measure. But I have used all three of these, and I think I prefer the dry ice when possible, or a CO2 canister when possible that releases a consistent amount of CO2 over the night.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dry ice, at least in my experience, also is far superior
Yeah.
as an attractant. Okay, after collection, can we use morphological features to identify and classify mosquitoes using microscopy? Is that good enough? Your response, Neil?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, uh, there are cryptic species. For example, with the Anopheles gambi, there's a complex, right? There are 5 to 7 species in there: Arabianthus, gambi, Kaluzi, and each one of them function differently. And you might want to do molecular analyses, but based on your question, you might just want to do morphological analysis. If you don't have the resources and capacity and funds to do PCRs in lab, then you're stuck with just morphological identification. Just make sure that when you analyze and present your data, you say things like, these mosquitoes might be from the Anopheles gambi complex and might include multiple species, right? Just make sure you present what you actually analyzed and what you actually did. Though ideally, yes, you would have very specific species level identifications.
Neil, this is not strictly about
Yeah,
vector surveillance, but it is a question that even many experienced entomologists find perplexing. This term pre-qualification. Would you mind explaining to our good audience, WHO, when they say this product is pre-qualified for use, etc.,
yeah.
why don't they say qualified? Why do they say pre-qualified? It's just
Okay.
yeah.
So, oh, this is such a long question. So, WHO has specific processes in place to ensure that any product that comes to WHO for qualification, so that they can recommend it, or pre-qualification, uh, is assessed appropriately. So there, if you go to the WHO website, pre-qualification is a step where you present all the data you have on your product, which could be a bed net, it could be IRS, it could be new spatial emanator, and all this is available online. So you need it needs a request for each product. WHO will not disclose any information about this product, but because it's between the product and the manufacturer, you have to do a protocol review submission, which is important, all the data you have. The two people at WHO to ask about this is Geraldine and Dominic. They're both at WHO. Just Google their names. They will give you all the data you need, all the steps you have to follow through. I just saw them in Kenya actually last week. There are specific steps and specific modules you'll have to go through. For example, module five has all the entomological data required, and this might result in interim guidance. There are two studies required, flight room studies and semi-field studies, experimental hut studies. So there are all these studies that are required that they can tell you, and they will ensure, and this process that will ensure that the highest quality data is available to the people who will actually decide if this can qualify for WHO approval, right? So this pre-qualifying step ensures all that. Yeah, there's module five that looks at the guidance, the study designs, the location of your study sites. There's a protocol submission, which is, I think, PQ 200. Then you get formal feedback. And then there's module three and module four. And module three looks at the source providers of the chemicals. That's module three. Module four looks at emanation rates or activity rates of your. There's so much on there. I could spend hours, but the correct people to ask this question would be Dominic and Geraldine at the WHO PQ, at WHO PQ. I hope that was helpful. It was a lot of nothing. Sorry. No, but
Yeah,
it's a big
no,
picture.
I'm coming away a little more confused. Dr. Mukta, I think you're in the audience. If you have an answer, maybe we can get you to respond. But my understanding is, and I shouldn't even get into this argument, WHO will pre-qualify a product at a generic kind of level as acceptable and suitable for use in community level malaria control.
Mhm.
So for example, topical repellents, WHO does not recommend at community level um, malaria control. But they do say, it works for individuals, but that's not, our job. We're interested in products that provide malaria control at population level, village level, etc. So they're not really interested in individual recommendations. So they pre-qualify a product uh, as generally acceptable for a specific purpose. But they don't say qualify because they leave that to individual countries or national programs that this product qualifies in a specific country for application. And they don't want to presume and impose a decision on individual countries to qualify a product for use in that country. So I always thought that element comes into it, Neil.
Yeah.
I might be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah.
All right.
I just copied some text from my notes into the chat on PQ qualification processes for people to
Wonderful.
read.
Wonderful. All right. I apologize. I should have kept quiet. I
Oh,
probably
no,
just
not at all.
confused it. Yeah.
No, that was helpful.
So, yeah, I, somebody, um, disabled my ability to turn my video on. So I'm not able to turn my video on. Maybe that's a good thing. Oh, there it
Oh,
is back
good for
on.
you. Yeah.
But anyway, I thought in closing, maybe I should show my face. Um, so Neil, uh, it's almost 2.5 hours we've been going now. I didn't put more questions because many of the questions that appeared in the Q&A box it's persons that perfectly understandable, nothing wrong with that. They posed questions which were subsequently then addressed by you during your lectures. So so you actually dealt with those questions, and I deliberately then did not raise those for to pose to you again. Um,
I'm sorry to
so
interrupt, but
okay.
Dr. Mukhtar raised his hand.
Okay. Dr. Mukhtar, would you mind enlightening us, please? Thank you, Dr. Mukhtar.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to respond the last question, which is very important regarding the pre-qualification process, because I have been the part of the pre-qualification team over for 4 years with WHO. So this is very interesting question, and the country must understand the process. And Neil and you are elaborated something, but I will give you some more detail. Actually, WHO pre-qualified the product in three phases. Phase one, when it is determined the dose of the product. Then actually the phase two is a very important, where the semi-field trials are being evaluated. The data of the semi-field trials in the lab and semi-field trial, which actually evaluate the efficacy on different, like the iris on different surfaces, and that and the over the data evaluation. Actually there are three parts of the WHO pre-qualification, three parts. One is the for the efficacy, which are the composed of the entomologist like me. I was in the member where we evaluate the efficacy of any product. And then the safety to human and safety to environment. If any group disagree with the provided data, the process is again sent back to the manufacturer that they should complete data. So this is a very comprehensive system for the evaluation of any insecticide or ITN based on the efficacy against the target species like the target mosquito, then safety to environment, and safety to human. For safety to human, it is evaluated at the third phase, when the product is evaluated at actual field level to see is there any adverse effect on the community which are using that particular product in a trial. So there are three phases. Phase one for determination of the dose, and phase two is the for semi-field trials, which are actually in the lab trials for any product, and phase three, which is at the community level. So three levels of the evaluation of the product, and there are three different groups: entomologists, toxicologists, and the people who are evaluating this product and at the efficacy, and then the safety to human, safety to environment. So it's a very robust system. That's why the WHO pre-qualified product is always has the maximum safety and efficacy to target insects, to target product, or to target species, and safety to human and safety to environment. So this is just my. And finally, you did raise a very important question that the WHO just give a recommendation of this is the product which has been evaluated under this condition. No, it's up to the country who can adopt this product in its own local environment. So WHO doesn't impose the decisions, but it just gives the guideline about the any product that this is a WHO pre-qualified product after the evaluation through a robust system. No, it's totally up to the country who can adopt this product in its national policy or strategy. So this is the very robust system. So this is just my response as a part of WHO pre-qualification team. Thank you.
No, that was a wonderful explanation. Thank you so much for clarifying that. An excellent explanation. Thank you, Dr. Mukhtar. I just want to ask again, this was the basis of my own personal question. Why does WHO say pre-qualification? If you say pre-qualification, it implies that it's not fully qualified. So why don't, if they've gone through that whole rigorous process, why don't they say this product qualifies for international use for malaria control? Why do they say this product pre-qualifies? What makes a product then qualify? They never talk about a product being qualified. They always say pre-qualified. Why do they not say qualified?
I think this is a very interesting question because whenever we because when I joined this as a team of the WHO pre-qualified team, that first they have the term used in term and then they fully recommended. And then in 2018, when we have a meeting in Arusha, Tanzania, that the interim term was finished and they just used the pre-qualified. So even we discussed this, why pre-qualified, why not qualified? So is it just a terminology because the pre-qualified, maybe the country can have a further trials in the local condition and they can declare it as a fully qualified in our local. But from WHO, they use the term pre-qualified. Just like if we are using the ITN, some you people are using the LLINs. This is the just the terminology. So pre-qualification and qualification is a game of the terminology. But I
Yeah,
don't find any very strong background for the pre-qualification. I give you the example of the interim recommendation and fully recommendation because in 2017, when the pre-qualified team was established, before 2007, it was the Hoopers, WHO evaluation scheme, Hoopers. And Hoopers was converted into pre-qualified team in 1st January 2017. And they used the term of the pre-qualification instead of the interim because before 2017 they used the interim and fully qualified. So then they used the pre-qualified and qualified. So this is just the terminology, but I don't think it's a very maybe because I remember in 2019 when we start discussion on the same point, then why not fully pre-qualified? And some expert who are very good expert and very keep a member of this team that maybe the country want to have its the trials in its own conditions, then they can declare that it's a fully qualified. But WHO give you the guideline as a pre-qualified product after having the three
that's my
doses.
understanding. That's
Yeah,
my understanding as
yeah,
well. Yeah. So uh, WHO cannot fully qualify it. The final qualification has to be at national country level.
yeah.
But that's extremely valuable information and background. Thank you so much, Dr. Mukhtar. Dear audience and dear everyone, thank you. Another wonderful day of shared information. I think we all learned yet more again. So thank you to Neil for his wonderful way of sharing through storytelling in the way that he explained, in a very logical way, without long paragraphs of written material, nice graphics, very good way of imparting, sharing information. Thank you, Neil. Thank you to our audience very much. Thank you to Dr. Porn, Amanda, and Wulan for your technical support in the background to make the the course technically possible. And we'll see you tomorrow afternoon at the same time for our third day of this highly enjoyable course. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Bye bye now.